You're doing it wrong. Stop trying to win the trade. Just because you have an abundance of assets doesn't make any one of them less valuable. Working off the needs of your trade partners will always help you get more trades done. If someone is sending you a one-for-one trade at the exact same position, they are telling you that they prefer that player over the one they have. It means they want points to win a championship, and you best believe you make them pay up for that. And if you're not okay with that, maybe you don't make that trade. You have to keep it simple. It's so easy to make mistakes in Dynasty when you're trading, and a lot of these mistakes I'm going to talk about today are more common than you think. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that you've made some of these mistakes yourself. Stay tuned to find out what mistakes to avoid and how to prevent yourself from making them in the future. Above all else, I do hope you all enjoy the video. Please leave a like if you do, comment down below your thoughts on the video itself, and tell me what mistakes you've made when trading in Dynasty, and be sure to let me know that it was helpful. But with all that said, let's get right to the content you came for. Now, just about with every single trade question or comment on YouTube, I'm always asked, did I win the trade? The number one mistake I have for y'all is to stop trying to win the trade. You'll get a heck of a lot more trades done if you're trying to look at it from the aspect of your trade partner as well as your own team. In essence, try to help both sides here, because at the end of the day, that's what a trade is supposed to do. And like I said, you're a lot more likely to get trades done. To know if you won the trade, just ask yourself, did my team get better with this trade? If the answer is yes, absolutely, you won the trade. But don't forget to be thinking about your partner as well when you're trying to get that trade done and help their team win too, because if they're not winning, it's a lot less likely that you're going to get that trade done, and you'll lose the trade you never made. The next mistake I have when it comes to trading in Dynasty is valuing your assets lower than you should because you have an abundance of them. Now listen close. Just because you have an abundance of assets doesn't make any one of them less valuable. If anything, the fact that you have a ton of first-round picks next year, for example, actually makes those picks that much more value because you have most of them on your team, which makes them a lot less scarce in the rest of the league. And don't forget, scarcity drives value. It's almost as if every asset should be viewed as it's the only one of that type of asset you have. That's the only first round pick. That's the only wide receiver one. That's the only running back one that you have on your team. And you kind of have to pretend when it comes to a value sense that you don't have this abundance of assets on your team. The big note or benchmark I have for you on knowing that you're doing this wrong, if you're justifying overpaying for a player because you have several first round picks next year, you're doing it wrong. Now, don't get me wrong. There are definitely players that are worth several first round picks, but it doesn't mean you should throw in that extra first round pick on top just because you have a bunch laying around. It's all about paying appropriate value at all times, even if you have that abundance of assets. The reason for stockpiling assets is so you can make those expensive purchases and acquisitions of players, but you shouldn't have to overpay and overstretch yourself to do so. One of my biggest pet peeves when I hear people justify trading away draft capital is trading away draft capital, future draft capital, because you have that extra year or two to get it back. Now, while this is absolutely a fact, you will have more time to get that pick back before that draft comes up. That mindset just sounds like that's how you're justifying reasoning for sending the pick. And it almost makes it sound like it's going to be easy to reacquire that pick or another pick in that first round draft. Now, if the deal you're making makes sense, I have no problem sending the pick. But fix that mindset of thinking that it might be easy to get it back or that it's going to be even possible to get it back. If you're sending a first round pick away, you should assume that you're not going to be able to get that pick back. And if you're not okay with that, maybe you don't make that trade. In essence, don't assume that it's going to be easy to get that pick back on your roster or another pick in that first round, that second round, that year, etc. The next mistake I have is sending or accepting one-for-one trades at the same position. So this is a running back to running back, a wide receiver to wide receiver, a tight end to tight end, a quarterback to quarterback, etc. type of trade. We're not crossing positional lines here. If someone is sending you a one-for-one trade at the exact same position, they are telling you that they prefer that player over the one they have, and basically saying to you that that player is better than the one they have. And how do we justify that kind of trade? You make that player pay up for that exchange, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a first-round pick that you're getting back or even a second. It's something where you could just flip a third and a second, get a third back on top, something to justify making that one-for-one trade where they have clearly told you that they value that player higher. Make them pay up. You can certainly make the argument that an older player for a younger player, whether you're a rebuilding team or a contending team, might make more sense, might have more value, might be a fair deal. But for me, I don't care. You're telling me you want this player for that player at the same position. I'm going to make you pay up for it, at least a little bit. Because if they're trying to actively acquire that older player, it means they want points to win a championship, and you best believe you make them pay up for that. When we're talking about sending and receiving trades, one of the worst things you can do is accept the first first trade offer you're sent. When a first offer is sent, it's rarely sent as the last offer they'll play with. A lot of times when a trade is sent, a middle ground is set ahead of time where they'll actually accept a trade offer. Think about it, you probably do the same exact things when you send trades. Hey, I'd really love to get this, so I'm going to start here so that when and if they counter, I end up in the middle ground that I'm okay with. So even if you like the offer outright, see what else you can squeeze out of that deal. Even if it's something as simple as an additional third round pick or a second and third round pick flip, or say you increase a third round pick to a second round pick, or say if you'd be sending a second, see if you can make it a third round pick. Anything you can do to adjust the value that little bit, absolutely do it. Take advantage of every sliver of value you can. Now in Dynasty, we all have this grand scheme in mind. We're oftentimes planning ahead and trying to figure out our way to make our team as good as possible, thinking about more than one piece at a time. The next mistake I have is planning ahead in your trades or planning out future trades that don't really exist yet. And what I mean by this is don't make trades with the assumption in mind that you'll be able to make additional trades to fix the holes you've left in your lineup. Now that means if you're trying to make a trade at wide receiver, let's say, and you're already kind of thin at that position, but you can add a running back to your team to make your running back depth that much better. Don't assume that you can move another tight end on your roster or another quarterback for another quarterback and a player in return to fix that hole you just left on your roster. Because keep in mind, when you're making a trade, you're usually going to damage some part of your roster, or you're going to offer up some value that you're going to have to fill the gap for later. And it's very easy to think ahead and think that, hey, I can make this trade for this guy later, to plug up each hole. And oftentimes you're just going to end up working yourself into a pit that's that hard to get out of. So the fix here is easy. Make one trade at a time, working with the roster you already have, not the make-believe one you're trying to trade for. One of the most frustrating things to see in YouTube comments is just having trades that are just overloaded with so many players. So the next mistake here is working with too many pieces at a time. You have to keep it simple. If you have any hopes of justifying player value or value to value in trades, keeping it simpler will make it that much easier for you to evaluate trades in the future. Pick the one player you want and the piece you're willing to send and work around those pieces to make that deal work. Avoid these massive blockbuster trades with several first round picks and 12 other total pieces. Those just make it impossible to equate value across the board. And more than likely what's going to happen in those situations is you're going to either leave value on the table or grossly overpay for that what you got out of that package deal. Because unless you're going to sit there with a giant whiteboard like the one I have behind me and try to justify and draw the lines to make the trades make sense, it's more than likely you're going to end up overpaying or just making bad deals in general. Now to touch on something that I'm just really not a fan of in most of my leagues. Something I avoid like the plague is moving a ton of pieces for one piece in return. You won't find many scenarios in my leagues, in my trades that I've done in the past, where I send even more than 2 or 3 assets for one piece. And don't get me wrong, some players in this league are worth selling the farm for, but most players in this league aren't worth selling 2 farms for. For example, oftentimes the going rate for a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase is 3 first-round picks. And while I'll say most of the time that value is pretty fair, when you look at that deal, you're sending 3 first-round picks that have a potential to be a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase or whatever other piece you're trading those 3 firsts for. I know those picks aren't guarantees, but you're still sending those opportunities to another team. Making those big acquisitions are part of why it's so important to build up that draft capital in the first place, and you should feel free to do so. But I will say tread lightly, especially if you need those assets in the future on your team, because at some point it may be better to just take 3 shots in the dark, quote unquote, at rookies that have equally as much potential as Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, like I mentioned. And I want to stress that I know those are not guaranteed picks in those rounds, but it's something to think about. And going back to a previous point I made about not sending or overpaying more of these high value assets just because you have a bunch of them. Essentially, if you have a large amount of assets built up, feel free to make those expensive purchases, especially when you're trying to make a run or really build a strong core in your team, especially when you can build one for the long haul with a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. But at the end of the day, don't just overpay to overpay. And the last one I got for y'all today is not paying attention to the needs of your trade partner. Now, this kind of goes back to the topic of not trying to win the trade, but also just working off the needs of your trade partners will always help you get more trades done. And think about it like this: offering running backs for wide receivers when they have plenty of running backs and little to no wide receivers is unlikely to yield a good trade for both sides, or a trade at all. What problems can you solve for this team that you're trading with? Can you fulfill a need at a position that you have excess in exchange for helping in an area that you need help in. This note is also kind of twofold, factoring around whether your possible trade partner is a contending or a rebuilding team, because obviously the type of players a team will have interest in will change based on the trajectory of that team. So if you're trying to get Rachaad White and a third-round pick from a rebuilding team, don't go sending Amari Cooper. While that deal is fair value, it doesn't really work in that context. Now, if a rebuilding team was sending Amari Cooper for Rachaad White and a third-round pick, I think that's pretty fair value, and that deal might even get done. But at the end of the day, it just goes to show that you need to be analyzing the team that you're trying to trade with, see what they need, see what their strengths are, and try to think about what their team trajectory might be. And don't forget, you can always go as far to just DM the person and ask their thoughts on what players they're willing to move, what type of positions or players they might be looking for, as well as what they believe their own team trajectory is. Communication is key in trades after all. Well, that is it for this one today. I do hope you all enjoyed. Please, if you like, if you did, comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. How many of these trading mistakes have you made, and what others have you made as well? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the 2 videos on your screen where we dive into some rebuilding mistakes as well as some mistakes in Dynasty in general. Make sure you're rebuilding and running your Dynasty the right way and avoiding these very, very common mistakes. But hey, that's going to be it for us today. We will see y'all in the next one, but until then, y'all have a good one.